Angela Morris had always believed in small steps. Her life was a series of patient moves forward, sometimes uphill, sometimes steady, but always determined. For years, she worked long hours building her event planning business. She started with little more than a laptop at her kitchen table, a cell phone, and a big dream. There were times when money was tight, when bills looked taller than the income, but Angela had a quiet strength. She learned to smile through setbacks and keep moving. So when she finally walked into the bank that Monday morning, she carried with her more than just a piece of paper. She carried years of hard work, late nights, and quiet prayers. In her hand was a check, a large one, bigger than anything she had ever held before. It wasn't just ink and numbers, it was proof that her small business had grown into something real, something respected. A new contract with a well-known company had finally placed her business on the map, and this deposit would cover salaries, rent for her small office, and investments in better equipment. It was, in her eyes, a fresh start. The bank lobby was busy that morning. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished floors. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, reflecting off the marble counters. People stood in lines, some with envelopes, others clutching checks, and a few quietly scrolling through their phones as they waited. Angela adjusted her blazer, holding the check carefully inside a folder so it wouldn't bend. Her heart beat a little faster than usual. She wasn't nervous exactly, but she knew this was a milestone. When her turn came, she approached the teller's counter with a polite smile. The teller, a young man with neatly pressed clothes and an expression that seemed more bored than welcoming, barely looked up. Angela greeted him warmly, slid the folder forward, and explained she wanted to deposit the check into her business account. The teller glanced down, his eyes quickly flicking over the amount. His eyebrows lifted slightly. For the first time, he looked up at Angela longer this time, as if measuring her against the numbers on the check. She noticed the pause, the slight tilt of his head, and felt a sudden stiffness in the moment. Angela kept her smile steady. "It's from one of my new contracts," she explained, keeping her tone friendly, as if to reassure him. "Everything is in order. Here are the supporting documents." She gently tapped the folder that held the letter from the issuing company, clearly showing the contract agreement. But the teller didn't open the folder. He didn't even glance at the documents. Instead, he gave a short laugh under his breath, the kind that wasn't really amused but dismissive. "This looks off," he said flatly, holding the check between his fingers as if it were an odd object. Angela blinked. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice calm but confused. "This doesn't look real," the teller replied, shrugging. "We see these things sometimes." Without another word, he set the check aside on his desk, not inside the tray where deposits usually went, but almost like it was unwanted mail. For a moment, Angela felt the air leave her chest. She had walked into the bank with pride, but now her heart sank. She tried to stay composed. "I assure you, it is completely valid. You can verify it through the standard system. I also have the documentation right here." She pointed again to the folder, trying not to let her voice shake. The teller didn't reach for it. He leaned back in his chair, his tone flat and unconcerned. "Ma'am, I don't need to run it. It's clearly not genuine." Angela's lips parted in disbelief. Around her, the line of customers shifted, some glancing toward the counter where she stood, others pretending not to notice. She felt every pair of eyes, whether they looked at her directly or not. It was as if the entire lobby had suddenly gone still. Her mind raced. She wanted to protest, to demand he do his job properly, but something inside reminded her to remain steady. She had faced moments before where being too forceful only led to doors closing faster. So she tried again, her voice measured and polite. "Sir, this check was issued directly by the company listed here. If you would please process it, You'll see everything is valid. It's important for my business. But the teller's expression didn't change. Instead of checking the system, instead of following the normal verification process, he pushed the check back toward her across the counter. I'm not taking it. You'll have to take it somewhere else. The folder trembled slightly in her hands as she gathered the papers. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe evenly. It wasn't just the refusal that stung, it was the way it had been done. No care, no respect, no willingness to even check. It felt like her years of hard work, all the nights she stayed up balancing numbers and planning events, had been brushed aside with one careless gesture. Angela looked down at the check, still crisp, still heavy with promise, but now marked by the weight of doubt. She stood for a moment, unsure if her legs would carry her forward. She could feel a lump rising in her throat, but she held it down. She would not let tears come here, not in this place, not in front of strangers. With quiet dignity, she slid the check back into her folder, thanked the teller in the softest voice she could manage, and turned away. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor as she walked out of the bank, her back straight, though her spirit felt shaken. Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. Cars moved along the street, people bustled past with coffee cups and briefcases, and the sun continued to shine. But for Angela, the morning felt dimmer. She sat on a bench near the bank, opening the folder again to look at the check. Her fingers traced the printed numbers, the name of the company, the signature at the bottom. It was all there, exactly as it should be. She knew in her heart and in fact that it was genuine. As she sat there, a thought pressed against her mind: why wasn't I believed? She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't caused a scene, hadn't done anything but present the truth. And yet, the truth had been tossed aside without a glance. After a long moment, she closed the folder carefully, took a deep breath, and stood up. She wasn't going to let this defeat her. She had worked too hard to let one dismissive encounter steal her progress. She would call the company, confirm everything again, and return stronger. But the sting of that morning, the sting of being pushed aside so easily, would stay with her long after she left the bench. Angela walked away from the bank with determination in her step. The check was still in her hands, her business still hers, her dream still alive. Yet in her heart, she knew something deeper had just been revealed, something about trust, about respect, and about the way people are too often judged before their truth is even given a chance. That day, Angela learned that success doesn't only mean securing contracts or earning checks. Sometimes, success means standing tall even when others doubt you. And though her deposit had been denied, her dignity remained intact. She would hold onto that as tightly as she held the folder pressed against her chest. Angela spent the rest of the afternoon trying to push the bank experience out of her mind, but the scene kept replaying like an old recording. The teller's dismissive tone, the way he had brushed aside her check without even giving it a chance, and the eyes of strangers in the bank lobby, all of it stayed with her. She tried to focus on her work, replying to emails and preparing proposals for upcoming clients, but her thoughts kept circling back to that counter, that folded check, and that unspoken message: "You're not worth believing." By evening, Angela sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. The check lay beside it, still inside the folder she had carried so carefully. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for the company that had issued it. The line rang a few times before a cheerful voice answered. "Good evening, Morris Events, this is Carla speaking." Angela recognized the voice of the company's finance officer. She exhaled, feeling some comfort. "Hi Carla, it's Angela Morris. I wanted to confirm something about the check you issued me last week. The bank didn't even process it. They said it wasn't valid." There was a pause on the other end before Carla spoke again, her voice filled with surprise. "That can't be right, Angela. I personally signed off on that payment. It came from our corporate account." Everything is completely legitimate. Do you want me to send over the verification documents again? Angela felt relief mixed with frustration. Yes, please. That would help. I knew it was fine, but the way they treated me, she trailed off, unwilling to say more. She didn't want her client to think she was shaken, even though inside she felt bruised. Within minutes, Carla emailed her a copy of the issued payment slip, along with the confirmation letter. Everything matched perfectly. Angela stared at the documents on her laptop screen. She wasn't wrong. She hadn't been mistaken. The problem hadn't been with the check at all. The problem was the refusal to even look. That night, she tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet down. She lay awake replaying the conversation at the bank in slow motion. She thought of the way the teller had pushed the check aside, almost as though it were a nuisance rather than her hard-earned income. She thought of the way he hadn't even touched the supporting documents, as if her words weren't worth considering. By morning, Angela decided she had to go back. This time, she wasn't going alone. She called her older brother, David, who had always been her steady voice of reason. David worked in accounting and knew how banks operated. When she told him what had happened, his voice tightened with disbelief. They didn't even check the system, he asked. No, Angela replied softly. They just brushed me off. Then I'm going with you, David said firmly. We'll make them look again. The two of them walked into the branch together later that morning. Angela's steps were slower this time, not with hesitation but with caution. She held the folder in her hands again, but now it felt heavier, as if it carried not just papers but the weight of yesterday's humiliation. The same teller was at the counter, his expression neutral as he greeted the next customer in line. Angela and David waited patiently until it was their turn. When they reached the counter, Angela spoke clearly. I was here yesterday to deposit this check. You refused it? I'd like you to verify it properly today. She slid the folder forward again, her brother standing silently beside her. The teller glanced at the check again, his expression unchanged. Like I said before, it looks off. David leaned in slightly, his voice calm but firm. Then run it through the system. That's your job. You don't decide what's real or not without checking. For a brief moment, the teller seemed caught off guard by David's tone. But instead of following the request, he gave a small shrug. I don't need to run it. I can already tell. Angela's heart sank again. It wasn't just dismissal anymore, it was defiance. The refusal wasn't about the check itself. It was about a mindset, an unwillingness to consider the possibility that she had brought something valid. Other customers nearby began glancing over again, sensing the tension. Angela could feel her face growing warm, though she kept her posture steady. She didn't want a scene, but she also couldn't let this stand. She drew in a breath and spoke again. This check was issued directly by the company listed. I have the official confirmation letter. Please call your manager if you don't want to process it yourself. The teller hesitated for a second, then muttered, Fine, I'll get someone. He disappeared into the back office. Angela and David stood waiting, the lobby feeling unusually quiet. Angela clutched the edge of the counter, her fingers pressing against the cool surface. David whispered, You're doing the right thing. Don't let them shake you. When the manager arrived, a woman in a navy suit with a polished smile, Angela repeated her request. She explained calmly what had happened the day before, and handed over the documents again. The manager listened, nodding politely. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, the manager said. We'll review the situation. For now, I suggest you try another branch to avoid further inconvenience. Angela's mouth fell slightly open. Another branch? That was their solution? Not an apology, not even an attempt to verify the check in front of her, but simply pushing the problem away. David stepped in. So you're telling my sister to walk out again with a valid check because your staff refuses to do a basic verification? The manager kept her polite expression, but her answer was the same. I'm suggesting another branch might be more helpful. Angela felt the familiar sting rise in her chest again. She wanted to argue, to demand the respect she deserved, but she also felt her energy draining. She had work to return to, clients waiting, a business to run. She couldn't spend all her strength fighting with people who had already decided not to listen. With quiet dignity, she gathered her folder once more. She looked the manager in the eye, gave a small nod, and turned to leave. David followed, his jaw tight with frustration. Outside, as they stepped into the morning sun, David shook his head. I don't believe this. That was unbelievable. Angela took a slow breath. It's not the first time I've been dismissed, she said softly. But it's the first time it's cost me so much time, energy, and pride. She looked down at the folder in her hands. The check was still crisp, still real, still a symbol of her achievement. Yet the way it had been treated, tossed aside, doubted, and dismissed left a mark deeper than paper could hold. That night, as Angela sat at her desk again, she thought about the bank's refusal. It wasn't just about money. It was about being believed, about being respected enough to have her truth considered. The confrontation hadn't only bruised her pride, it had bruised her faith in a system that was supposed to serve her as a customer. She stared at the folder for a long time, her thoughts heavy but her spirit unbroken. She told herself quietly, tomorrow is another day. And I will not let this stop me. The morning after Angela's second visit to the bank, she woke up earlier than usual. Her mind was still restless, her thoughts circling around the same questions. Why had the teller refused her deposit? Why had the manager brushed her off so easily? She had spent the evening going through her papers again and again, just to reassure herself that everything was in order. The check was valid. The confirmation letter was valid. Everything was real. Yet, to the people at that bank, her truth hadn't mattered. Angela made coffee, sat by the window of her small apartment, and opened her laptop. She thought she might get some work done before her first client call. But the moment the news headlines loaded on her screen, she froze. The top story blared across the homepage: International heist drains $1.2 billion from major bank. Her eyes widened. She clicked the article quickly, her heart thumping in her chest. The words jumped out at her. Overnight, in a carefully coordinated cyber attack, hackers had breached the bank's systems. The institution had lost more than $1 billion, an amount so staggering Angela had to read the sentence twice to believe it. The article explained how the theft had been carried out through fraudulent transfers across international accounts. The hackers had used sophisticated technology to break past the bank's security. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the money was already gone, scattered across borders and impossible to recover. Angela leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. The same bank that had refused her legitimate check had lost more than $1 billion overnight. The irony was sharp, almost unbelievable. She thought back to the teller's dismissive tone, to the way he had pushed her check aside without a second glance. Yesterday, they had treated her like she was trying to trick them. Today, the world was learning that the real deception had come from somewhere else entirely, and it had cost them everything. She whispered under her breath, 1.2 billion, the number felt unreal. Her check, though large for her business, was tiny compared to that sum. And yet, her honest deposit had been doubted while an enormous theft had slipped right through the cracks. Angela's phone buzzed with a message from David. Turn on the news. You won't believe this. She picked up the remote and switched on the television. Every major channel was covering the story. News anchors spoke in urgent voices, analysts debated what this meant for the financial industry, and footage of the bank's tall glass headquarters filled the screen. Employees were shown rushing in and out of the building, their faces tense. Reporters stood outside the doors, microphones in hand, repeating the same words, $1.2 billion gone, possibly forever. David called her a few minutes later. "Do you see this?" he asked, his voice half incredulous, half frustrated. "I see it," Angela replied softly. "I can't believe it. Yesterday they couldn't even process a single check. Today they've lost everything." David exhaled loudly. "It's unbelievable, Angie. They treated you like you didn't matter. And meanwhile, they weren't even watching the real danger. This is beyond irony." Angela didn't know what to say. She sat quietly, listening to her brother's voice, her eyes still fixed on the television screen. She felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, validation, sadness, even a small spark of relief. Relief, not because the bank had lost money, but because her own truth had been proven beyond doubt. The problem had never been her check. The problem had been their blindness. By noon, the story was everywhere. Social media buzzed with outrage, jokes, and disbelief. Memes spread across platforms, some mocking the bank's security, others pointing out the hypocrisy of institutions that scrutinized small customers while failing to protect themselves from massive risks. One post caught Angela's eye: "A bank can doubt a hard-working woman's deposit but lose $1 billion overnight without blinking." She stared at the sentence for a long time, feeling the truth of it sink deep. Later that afternoon, her client Carla called. "Angela, did you see the news?" she asked, sounding both shocked and concerned. "Yes," Angela said quietly. Carla sighed. "It's all over the industry right now. Everyone's talking about it. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that teller yesterday. You were dismissed unfairly, and now this. It's just unbelievable timing." Angela appreciated the sympathy, but what she felt most was clarity. The events of the last 24 hours had drawn a sharp line in her mind. Yesterday had been about personal humiliation. Today was about proof that the system itself was broken. She thought back to the way the teller had looked at her, his quick judgment, his refusal to even try the standard process. She thought of the manager's polite dismissal, sending her away rather than helping. Those same people were probably sitting at home right now, watching the news, realizing that while they doubted one customer, their entire institution had been robbed behind their backs. That evening, Angela walked through her neighborhood, trying to clear her head. The city felt alive, with people chatting in cafes, children playing in the park, and the hum of traffic filling the streets. But everywhere she went, she overheard the same words: "Did you hear about the bank? Can you believe it? $1 billion. It seemed the whole world was talking about it." And for Angela, every whisper was a reminder of what had happened to her. She wasn't the one who had failed. She wasn't the one who had been careless. She was the one who had been doubted while doing everything right. As she walked, Angela felt a strange strength rise inside her. Yesterday she had left the bank feeling small, her confidence bruised. But today, in the shadow of the bank's massive loss, she felt seen in a different way. Not by the teller, not by the manager, not even by the institution itself, but by the truth. The truth had spoken louder than anything she could have argued. When she returned home, she sat at her desk and opened her notebook. She wrote in careful, steady handwriting, "They doubted me, but they failed themselves. I will not let this break me. I will rise from this stronger." She closed the notebook, placed it beside her laptop, and looked at the folder holding her check. It was still there, still valid, still waiting to be deposited. But now, it wasn't just a check. It was a symbol, a reminder of her resilience, of the unfairness she had faced, and of the irony that had unfolded the very next day. Angela knew she had more choices to make. She would have to decide where to bank, how to move forward, and how to tell her story. But for now, she allowed herself a quiet smile. Life had a strange way of revealing truth. Sometimes it came slowly, through small victories. And sometimes it came suddenly, through headlines that shook the world. And this time, the truth was clear. While she had been doubted, the real mistake had been theirs. The news of the billion-dollar loss did not fade quickly. For days, headlines continued to cover the story. Financial experts debated what it meant for the banking industry. Politicians called for investigations. Customers lined up outside branches, some demanding answers, others quietly closing their accounts. The bank that had once carried an image of power and security was now under a heavy shadow of doubt. Angela watched all of this unfold with mixed emotions. At first, she kept her own experience private. She wasn't sure she wanted to speak about what had happened to her at the branch. But as the story grew larger, as more people questioned how such a failure could have happened, Angela began to realize something. Her own small story connected directly to the bigger picture. One evening, she attended a local networking event for small business owners. The room was filled with entrepreneurs, some in suits, others in casual wear, all of them chasing their own dreams just like her. Conversations buzzed about marketing strategies, supply chains, and the latest industry trends. But in the corners of the room, the same topic kept surfacing: the bank. "Can you believe it?" one man said to his group. "They lost more than $1 billion. And yet when I went in last week to deposit a much smaller check, they treated me like I was wasting their time." Angela listened quietly, then found herself stepping closer. "I had a similar experience," she said softly. The group turned to look at her, curious. She took a breath, steadying herself, and explained what had happened, the teller pushing aside her check, the refusal to even verify it, the manager brushing her off. As she spoke, she saw nods of recognition, frowns of sympathy, and even some looks of anger. "That's exactly the problem," one woman said firmly. "They doubt people like us. They doubt small business owners, hard-working people. But look who they actually failed to stop." The group murmured in agreement. Angela felt a strange relief, as if a heavy weight she had been carrying alone was now being shared. It wasn't just her. Others had felt dismissed too. Her story was not an isolated incident, it was part of something larger. Over the next few days, word began to spread. Angela's colleagues encouraged her to share her experience more openly. "People need to hear this," David told her one evening. "It shows exactly what's wrong with their system." At first, Angela hesitated. She wasn't someone who sought attention. She preferred to let her work speak for itself. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that staying silent would mean allowing the injustice to go unnoticed. So, she decided to tell her story. She wrote a thoughtful post online, describing in simple words what had happened at the bank. She didn't use anger. She didn't accuse anyone personally. She simply told the truth: how she had walked in with a legitimate check, how she had been refused without a glance, and how, the very next day, the bank had lost $1.2 billion in a cyber attack. The post spread quickly. Within hours, people were sharing it across platforms. Some added their own experiences in the comments, stories of times they too had been doubted or dismissed by banks. Others praised Angela for speaking up, calling her words powerful and brave. Local community leaders reached out to her, asking if she would share her story at meetings and forums. One evening, Angela found herself standing in front of a group at the community center, the same folder with the check in her hands, as she told the story again. "When I walked into the bank," she said, her voice steady but warm, "I wasn't just holding a piece of paper. I was holding years of hard work. But instead of seeing my effort, instead of respecting the process, they refused to even look. They dismissed me without a thought. And then, less than a day later, they lost more money than I could even imagine." The room was silent as she spoke. Every face watched her intently, some nodding, some frowning in thought. "This isn't just about me," Angela continued. "It's about how often hard-working people are doubted. It's about how institutions sometimes spend more energy questioning honest customers than protecting themselves from real danger. And in the end, everyone pays the price." When she finished, the room broke into applause. Angela felt her cheeks grow warm, but she also felt stronger than she had in weeks. For the first time since that morning at the bank, she no longer felt small. She felt heard. Her story continued to ripple outward. Local newspapers picked it up, writing short features about her experience alongside coverage of the billion-dollar loss. Radio hosts discussed it during morning shows, calling it a striking example of misplaced judgment. Even small business forums online shared her story as a reminder of the challenges entrepreneurs face in being recognized and respected. Meanwhile, the bank struggled to contain the damage. Their executives held press conferences, promising reforms and stronger security. But for many people, the irony was impossible to ignore. They had failed to protect billions, yet they had questioned someone carrying an honest check. Angela's role in the larger conversation wasn't about revenge. She never spoke with bitterness. Instead, she carried herself with calm dignity, focusing on the lesson rather than the wound. She often repeated the same line in interviews and meetings: "It's not about what they lost. It's about what we all lose when people aren't believed." Her words resonated. Community leaders praised her for shining a light on an issue that was often overlooked. Young entrepreneurs told her that her story gave them courage to keep pushing forward, even when faced with doubt. And families who had once felt invisible in financial spaces began to speak up more about their own experiences. Through it all, Angela stayed grounded. She still ran her business, still worked late nights on event plans and budgets. But now, her story had become part of something larger. It wasn't just about a check anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and the importance of listening before judging. In quiet moments, Angela sometimes sat at her desk and looked at the folder that still held her check. She thought about how one small piece of paper had connected her to a much larger truth. She thought about how, in a single week, she had gone from feeling humiliated to becoming a voice for change. And though the bank's executives continued to face scrutiny, Angela found peace in knowing that her story had made an impact. She hadn't chosen this path, but she had embraced it. And in doing so, she had turned a painful experience into a lesson the world couldn't ignore. Angela's life slowly returned to its usual rhythm in the weeks after the bank scandal. Her calendar filled up again with meetings, event setups, and late-night planning sessions. Clients continued to call, and new opportunities kept arriving. On the surface, everything looked the same as before. But deep inside, Angela knew she had changed. The experience with the bank and the events that followed had left a permanent mark on her outlook. One of the first decisions she made was simple but meaningful: she closed her account at the bank. It wasn't an emotional outburst, not a choice made in anger, but a quiet, firm decision. She walked into the branch one final time, requested the transfer of her funds, and walked out without looking back. Later that week, she opened a new account at a credit union recommended by her brother David. The credit union was smaller, with fewer branches and less glamour, but it carried something the big bank had lost: trust. On her first visit, the staff greeted her warmly, listened carefully, and asked about her business with genuine interest. Angela felt the difference immediately. It wasn't about marble floors or tall glass buildings, it was about respect. As her story continued to circulate, people began reaching out to her in unexpected ways. Strangers sent her kind messages online, thanking her for sharing her experience. Some shared their own struggles, describing moments when they too had been dismissed or overlooked. Others simply wished her well, saying her calm dignity inspired them. Angela found herself invited to speak at more community forums. At first, She hesitated. She wasn't a public speaker, and the idea of standing in front of large groups made her nervous. But each time she accepted, she discovered something new. People weren't there to judge her performance. They were there to hear her truth. And as she spoke, she felt her voice grow stronger. At one forum, a young woman approached her afterward with tears in her eyes. "I almost gave up on my small bakery business," she admitted. "But hearing your story reminded me that I can't let doubt stop me. If you can keep going after everything you faced, then so can I." Angela hugged her gently, moved by the sincerity in her words. That moment stayed with her long after the event was over. It reminded her that stories are powerful not just because they reveal pain, but because they spark courage in others. Meanwhile, the bank's reputation continued to crumble. Investigations revealed lapses in security, poor management decisions, and a culture of negligence. Executives held press conferences, promising change, but customers remained skeptical. Some branches grew quiet as account holders moved their money elsewhere. For many, the billion-dollar loss was unforgettable. For Angela, however, the irony was personal. She often thought back to that one morning, the teller pushing her check aside with careless ease. That moment, so small compared to the massive theft, represented something deeper, the danger of dismissing people too quickly. Angela didn't dwell on bitterness. She had no desire to see the bank destroyed. What she wanted was something much simpler: a world where people are treated fairly, where hard work is recognized, and where trust is given before judgment. In her private moments, Angela often reflected on how the experience had changed her. She realized that true strength isn't just about success or money. True strength is about holding your head high when others doubt you. It's about walking away from humiliation with dignity intact. And it's about turning pain into purpose, so others might learn from your story. Her business continued to grow steadily. With the funds from her contract safely deposited at the credit union, she invested in better equipment, hired 2 new assistants, and expanded her client list. Every event she planned felt like more than just a job. It felt like proof that she had overcome the doubts placed in her path. One evening, as Angela sat at her desk reviewing her schedule, she opened the same folder she had carried into the bank weeks before. Inside was the copy of her check, along with the confirmation letters. She looked at it quietly for a long time, her fingers brushing against the paper. The check was already cashed, the money already used to build her dream, but she kept the copy as a reminder. Not a reminder of humiliation, but of resilience. She whispered to herself, "They tried to dismiss me, but I didn't let them. I walked forward, and I'm still standing." Angela's reflection deepened over time. She began to see her story not just as her own, but as part of a larger message. Every person who had ever been doubted, every entrepreneur who had been turned away, every dreamer who had been told no without reason, her story belonged to them too. Months later, when another community group invited her to speak, Angela chose her words carefully. She stood before the audience, her voice steady and clear. "Life will always test us," she said. "Sometimes the test is not about our skills or our abilities, but about our patience, our dignity, and our determination. I was doubted when I should have been trusted. But instead of letting that break me, I chose to let it build me. And I want each of you to know you can do the same." The audience erupted in applause. Angela smiled, not out of pride, but out of gratitude. She was grateful for the chance to turn her pain into something meaningful, grateful for the strength she had discovered in herself, and grateful for the community that had embraced her story. Later that night, as she walked home under the city lights, Angela felt at peace. The memory of the bank teller no longer stung the way it once had. The $1.2 billion loss no longer shocked her as it once did. Instead, what remained was clarity. Clarity that respect matters more than wealth. Clarity that dignity can outlast doubt. Clarity that one person's story, spoken honestly, can ripple outward and inspire many. Angela knew her journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new struggles, new tests of her resolve. But she also knew she carried something inside her that no one could take away, the quiet strength of someone who had faced dismissal and chosen to rise above it. In the end, the bank's loss was written into history as a cautionary tale. But Angela's story lived on in a different way. Not as a headline, not as a statistic, but as a lesson, that dismissing someone's truth can cost more than money. It can cost trust, opportunity, and the chance to recognize greatness in its earliest form. And as Angela walked forward, her steps steady and sure, she carried that lesson not as a burden, but as a light. A light that guided her, and perhaps, one day, would guide others too.